Welcome to our virtual friends watching live from around the world. We are so excited to get to be the launch event for late bloomers. We are here with our Atlanta friends, here with folks around the world to celebrate this brand new hot off the press book. It's always an honor to get to celebrate Atlanta writers, and we are claiming you as an Atlanta writer all the way. So we are here with Deepa Varadarajan, with Zoe Fishman, excuse me. And this is a celebration of an Indian American family whose lives are turned upside down when the parents split up 36 years into their arranged marriage. It is a witty, big-hearted debut. And we are really, really thrilled to have Zoe with us, who stepped in at the last minute. It's always wonderful to have a writerly community and have folks be able to support one another. And we're also always excited to get to celebrate debut fiction. So we believe in people launching their books in community, and this is just very fun for us. So thank you to all of the friends and family who've shown up tonight. And thank you to everybody watching worldwide. So I'm going to kick it over to Zoe, but before I do that, I'm going to let folks know that you are welcome to ask questions virtually, and you're welcome to ask questions here with us in the room. I'm going to bring you a microphone if you would like to ask questions when we come to that, so that everybody can hear you in the computer and in the room. So without further ado, please welcome our esteemed authors.
Family, including my parents who flew here from Texas. So yeah, I'm just glad to share this launch with all of you.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to write this book?
Yeah, so I've always been fascinated by the idea of reinvention and second chances. Is it ever too late to reinvent your life, or can you do it at any age? And the couple at the center of this book, Lata and Suresh Raman, have recently divorced after 36 years of an unhappy arranged marriage. And it was Lata's decision to leave, one that she struggled with. And now they're both starting over. They're trying for these new beginnings. Lata has her first job outside the home at a university library, which she loves. And a professor there asked her out, which is this totally new and nerve-wracking experience for her. And her ex-husband, Suresh, is trying online dating for the first time, and it's really not going at all how he expected, as I guess online dating doesn't go as people expect a lot of times. And meanwhile, their kids, their two 30-something-year-old children, Priya and Nikesh, are struggling to adjust to these changes. They're struggling to adjust to their parents' new lives. And they're dealing with some really messy relationship issues of their own, which they're hiding from their parents. And so in this book, there's a lot of secret keeping. There's a lot of hiding of things. There's a lot of revelations and growing apart and coming back together. And I've always been drawn to stories about families discovering secret sides of one another and learning how to let the people that you love evolve and become these new versions of themselves. So that's how it came about. And I knew I was going to set it in a university town in Texas, similar to the town where I grew up, the kind of town that I haven't often seen depicted in fiction, especially novels about immigrant families.
I hear, well, I know that you're a little bit of a late bloomer. This is your first novel in your 40s after a career in law and academia. Can you talk a little bit about what the transition to become a novelist was like? And did you always want to be a writer?
Yeah, I was not one of those people who always knew that she was going to be a writer or she wanted to be a writer. I was always a reader. I think like most writers, I was always someone who loved to read. I grew up in a university town in Texas, as I mentioned. And when I was growing up, I was one of the few Indian American kids in my school and often felt like an outsider. And like a lot of outsiders, I was drawn to reading fiction. It was like my escape, my solace. But it really didn't occur to me to try writing fiction until quite a bit later. In fact, it was not until law school that I started thinking I wanted to give fiction writing a try. In fact, I remember when I was in law school, there were people around me who were publishing nonfiction, fiction. And there's something about physical proximity to people doing something that you think you might want to do, but you're kind of afraid to try, that makes you start thinking, okay, maybe I can try doing this too. So that's when the idea kind of first started for me, that I wanted to try writing fiction. And I graduated from law school, and I remember I was working my first law firm job at a big New York law firm, not so different than the one Nikesh works at. And like Nikesh, I also did not very much enjoy it. It was not really for me. So I signed up for my first creative writing class while I was working that job. And once a week, I would go and I would, share my first attempts at writing fiction. And it was this thing I looked forward to every week more than anything else. And ever since then, fiction writing has been a part of my life. And this novel took me a very, very, very long time to write, well over a decade. Not continuously. It was something that I did in sort of fits and starts. Would stop for a while and put it in a drawer and then pull it back out and revisit it. And I worked on it for a very long period of time. And it wasn't a very clear process at all. It felt a lot with just like sort of feeling my way in the dark, trying to figure out how to write a novel. And so I'm elated that that it's done and it's being published, because it took a very, very long time for me to kind of figure out how to do it.
Did you have readers along the way?
I did. I was very lucky in that, I participated in some workshops initially that were really helpful to me, because I think in the beginning, you really need people to encourage you and to make you start believing that you can be a writer. Mm-hmm. And my first few workshops, I participated in something called a writer's studio and then something called Sackett Street Writers Workshop. And those were enormously helpful to me. There were places where I was learning, and it was sort of the first time I was told, "You're a writer. You can try to do this." And so that was really important for me. And along the way, I have shared parts of this with teachers, friends, workshops, including yours, and all of that was enormously helpful. So I think one of the things I've really learned along the way is it's really helpful to have a community of writers to share work with. And there's nothing like being in a room, seeing people react to something you've written to understand if it's working or not.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't have an outline. You just went in blindly.
Yeah, I don't write with outlines. I sort of start with a voice, a scene, a piece of dialogue, and that I kind of go from there. Mm-hmm. Which I'm realizing sort of an inefficient way of doing things. So I've experimented with using outlines, but it never quite works for me. And I always just end up ignoring the outline. So I always keep hoping that will work for me, because in my academic life, I'm a compulsive outliner. And so I'm always thinking, oh, well, maybe I can, embrace that in my fiction writing life, but it just never ends up working out for me.
Everybody has their own process.
Do you outline?
Oh,
you do?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I need a roadmap before I start. I'm very happy when the characters become their own people and therefore render the outline obsolete, because that reassures me that art is actually happening. Characters are developing. But yeah, I can't. It's just too vast a landscape for me if I don't have some kind of idea about where I'm going to go. But every writer is different.
Yeah, I mean, I think increasingly, like more and more when I write, I have some general sense of where I'm heading, but like I said, even when I try to outline it, I find like I don't really stick to it.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, I do love that process of discovery when the characters do something that surprises me and that I don't expect, and I'm just like, I can't believe you did that, Lata, and I'm sort of like excited when it happened.
Right. Yeah. They're becoming their own people. Right. Did any experiences from your own life, other than growing up in a Texas university town, inform the novel?
Well, all the characters are very much a product of my imagination, but I will say the very first spark of the idea came to me about 20 years ago. At the time, I was dating an Indian American man whose parents had recently divorced, and his dad was beginning to try online dating. And I thought it was this really brave thing to try to start over later in life, do something outside your comfort zone. And at the same time, I was going through these relationship issues of my own. I was in my 20s. And so all of that made me think, well, I've never read a story before about a recently divorced Indian couple and their adult children all going through romantic turmoil at the same time. I'd like to read a story like that. And so I thought, okay, maybe I could try to start writing a story like that, And I guess the other thing I would say is the couple at the center of the story, Lata and Suresh, they had an arranged marriage. Theirs did not work out. But my own parents had an arranged marriage. Lucky for me, theirs did work out. They were an incredibly compatible couple. But, there were definitely points in my life where I thought to myself, this is amazing, that this worked out so beautifully. Like, what if it hadn't? What if it had gone another way? And it was, in some ways, I guess this novel is sort of this alternate imaginary path, this sort of hypothetical what if. I'm looking at the law professors in the room. We love hypotheticals. So yes, this giant hypothetical what if.
Was arranged marriage ever something that might have been waiting for you, or was that not part of your narrative?
No. I think and this is something actually Nikesh talks about in the book, but even, he talks about it with respect to his own parents, as he even imagines for them what might have happened had they been born a few decades later, where for their own cousins, younger relatives in India, the concept of arranged marriage had become something kind of different, where essentially their parents sort of introduce them to people and then they go on dates and they figure out if they like each other. So, but no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Each of the characters in Late Bloomers are at somewhat of a turning point. Suresh and
Lata
recently divorced and are starting to date again, and their children Priya and Nikesh also are going through romantic and family struggles of their own. Can you talk a little bit about the themes of second chances and reinvention in the novel? Do you think it's ever too late for someone to have a second chance?
Yeah, so I mean, all of the characters are definitely in this period of reinvention and maybe even reorientation. So Suresh, for example, he never thought this would happen to him. He never thought his wife of 36 years would decide to leave. And he is sitting in this big house that they used to share, and he is feeling regret. He is thinking about, the mistakes that he made and maybe the things he could have done differently. But at the same time, he is, he's trying for a second act. He is he thinks there is still happiness out there waiting for him with someone, and he is trying to find it in his own Suresh kind of way. So he is, embracing this idea of reinvention. And then Lata, she's faring better after the divorce. One of her big regrets in life is that she didn't have a career. And she has this new job at a university library, which she loves. She's made these new friends she works with who are these very colorful characters. And this professor who frequents the library is expressing interest in her. And so she's contemplating the idea of dating, and this thing that's very new for her, and that she's never done before. And so she's also, in this moment of reinvention and thinking about what a different life could look like. And the kids are also thinking about significant life changes. Priya is 35, their daughter Priya, she's 35. She's a history professor in Austin. She's unmarried. She is in this, well, she's struggling with her parents' new lives. She's quite judgmental about her dad's decision to online date. She's not in a very good position to judge because she is also having this affair with a married man and feels that it's sort of a dead end for her. And she wants, she wants a real partner. She's interested in having a family. And so she's really reevaluating her life too, and her choices and how to reorient her life. And her younger brother, Nikesh, he's kind of a hot mess too. He is, he's struggling with the anxieties of new parenthood. He's feeling increasing distance from his partner, Denise, after having a child. He's thinking way too much about a previous relationship that he had. And so, he's also in this period of thinking about life change and how to find happiness in life. So all of these characters are in this period of reinvention and reevaluation about their life. And you asked me if I believe in second acts. And I would say, yes, generally, I am a believer in second acts. I feel like there's always that possibility to begin a new relationship, a new friendship, find a new passion. I don't think there's ever an age limit on that. And I guess I'm also, as you mentioned, I'm kind of a late bloomer too. This is my debut novel. I'm in my mid-40s. And I'm personally invested in the idea of a second act, So I definitely believe it's
Right.
possible for people.
This is a rebirth of you too.
Yeah.
How does it
In a way.
feel?
Exciting.
Yeah.
It feels really exciting. It's like I've been saying, it's a very strange thing. All day today, people have been sending me pictures of themselves holding my book in their hand.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this amazing feeling to see all these people you love in your life holding this thing that you made, that you've been thinking about for years. It's like, it's really hard to explain it.
It's the best.
Yeah.
It's as a writer, you're in such a vulnerable position, but at the same time, at least I do, I feel so much power in the fact that I saw it through. And because it is a journey, writing a book is a journey.
I keep asking writers for advice about this process. Mm. And they say, just remember, whatever happens, you did it. You wrote this novel. You finished it,
That's right.
So I'm like, just keep remembering.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I would also say, never write for a particular audience. Never write for the money or the supposed fame, because that's not how it's going to roll out. You have to write because you love it.
I think that's right. I do feel like one of the things I learned in this process is to really focus on the process. Mm-hmm. And what I love about the process of writing, because you have so little control over ends or outcomes. And so it just seems like focusing on that is not a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there have been times in my career where that has overcome my love for the written word, and it never works out. I always go back to what propels me, what makes my heart sing. So, my little piece of advice.
Yeah, no, it's a good one.
There's so much humor in this book. Why was it important for you to weave humor and wit through your story?
So as a reader, I have always been drawn to writers who mix like humor and heartbreak, who do that well. You know, one of my favorite writers is Lori Moore. I love her stories. I think she does that really well. And you know, I always knew that when I wrote a novel, I wanted to incorporate humor, and you know, a lot of the preoccupations of this book, like trying to start over, dealing with aging, dealing with your family changing in ways that you don't expect, parenting young children, parenting adult children. I think all of these are situations that have moments of joy and humor, and they have moments of sorrow and heartbreak. And I really wanted a mix of all of that in this book. And I think it's a hard thing to do, actually. It's like a really hard thing to get that balance right and not let the humor overwhelm the sort of serious moments. So it was a lot of writing and revising to try to get that balance right. But again, those are always the stories that I'm drawn to and the writers that I'm drawn to. So.
Right. Who was the hardest character to write?
Yeah. So Suresh's voice came to me first. He was the first character I started writing. In some way, his was the easiest voice for me to find. And then actually, when I started writing his voice, I thought it was going to be a short story. I didn't actually know it was going to be a novel. And so I was writing it as a short story for a while. I couldn't get it to work as a short story. So then I kind of put it away and came back to it a few years later because I hadn't forgotten about him. And then I started thinking a lot more about Lata, his ex-wife, and Priya, his daughter. So I'd say the next voice that kind of came to me was Priya's. And then Lata and Nikesh were always a little bit harder for me to find. And so I think those took me a little bit longer to really find. And it's funny that over time, Lata has actually become my favorite character. In some ways, she was the hardest for me to really find and get, but once I did, she kind of became my favorite. Don't tell the others.
I remember. Do you remember if there was an aha moment with either of them where you finally felt like, oh, I understand who they are?
Yeah, I think with all of them, there was that moment where I was, you know, because for a long time, I'm writing so many scenes that I end up throwing away actually and cutting. But yeah, for all of them, I think there was this moment where I sort of was like, oh, okay, I really get you now. And that was definitely true. I don't know. It's funny because when I started writing this, I was in my 20s. I was sort of closer in age, the adult children characters. And now at the end of this process, I'm in my mid 40s. I'm sort of equidistant from the parent characters and the adult children characters. And I don't think a writer necessarily needs to go through things to be able to write characters, right? Because that's the joy of writing. It's the empathy and the imagination and being able to inhabit someone who's very different from you. But I do wonder sometimes if growing older myself and having kids and going through some of these experiences helped me really find Lata's voice and helped me figure out who I wanted her to be.
Probably. I always find that writing secondary characters is easier for me because the pressure's off. Do you feel that way too? Or any of the friends at the library, or did they steal your heart in a way that the others didn't?
I loved writing Deanna's character. I have to tell you, every scene with her in it was so much fun for me. And I think she was important both for Lata and for towards the end for Priya, because I think with Lata, even though she still has these friendships that she's retained in the Indian community, her longtime friends, she feels, and they still invite her to all their parties and all of that. She does feel some sense of discomfort, or she doesn't want to be scrutinized or pitied going there. And I think one of the things Deanna does for her is Deanna doesn't care that she's divorced. She could care less, right? And she's just this person that Lata can kind of be a new version of herself around. And so she's very important for Lata's character. I also think for Priya, one of the things by the end of the novel, I really wanted to give Priya a female friendship, almost more than I wanted to give her a romantic relationship. By the end, I was like, you need a really good girlfriend, you know, because in my own life, I really don't know what I would do without my female friendships. I've had, you know, this group of friends for decades. And and so by the end, I was like, Priya, I need to give you a friend.
It's so important. It's such an inventive way to have your protagonists learn more about themselves in those conversations with friends, just as in real life, the most profound self-actualization occurs.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking about your recent novel, and just so much of it is celebrating female friendships and
the backbone evolution for a woman, for sure. There are a couple of different moments in the book where characters consider the questions of whether or not children will end up like their parents. For example, Nikesh at one moment thinks we were a generation of boys raised by a generation of negligent fathers, and now we were fathers trying hard not to be like our fathers. But Suresh, his father, says at another point that children are similarly wired and correspondingly flawed to their parents. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. I think children do obviously learn a lot from their parents and often have some of the qualities of their parents and the characteristics of their parents. So, you know, certainly in this novel, both Priya and her mom, Lata, are sort of quick to worry and think the worst at times. And Priya, like her father, often speaks without thinking. So they do have a lot of these similar tendencies. But at the same time, I think children can also, you know, make these conscious decisions to make a different set of decisions than their parents and live life differently. And the example that you gave, right, about Nikesh thinking about his own father and his own father's approach to fathering, and, you know, he's really interested in that sort of generational difference that Nikesh's father, Suresh, like many men of his generation, were not really invested in some of the day-to-day details of parenting. And for Nikesh, he is very invested in it. He enjoys it, like many men of his generation, like many fathers of this generation who are very consumed by sort of the day-to-day details of parenting. And so I certainly think, even though, you know, children learn a lot from their parents and often share a lot of the same traits, there is also room to make these conscious decisions that are quite different. And you know, the characters in this book definitely do that.
Has that happened to you as a parent? Have you been faced with your children in a specific situation and consciously decided to parent in a different way than you were parented? Like a flash of recognition in a strategy that did not work?
You're asking this in front of my parents. No, I feel quite lucky in that I have two very good role models in parenting, and I'm not just saying that because they're sitting on a couch in front of me. But I think, you know, I'm trying to think of some specific examples. I mean, I'm sure there are moments where you think of things from your own life and you think, okay, I want to do this a little bit differently. I mean, I think that's inevitable.
I mean, right? I remember once with my son, you know, he was very upset about something, and I was speaking to him from, you know, an elevated, just being taller than him. And I had a flash of myself at that age and my father dealing with me, and I just got down on my knees. So I was eye level with him. And it was some sort of, I felt it in my bones that that's what I had longed for at that age. And my father was doing the best he could, but it was never simpatico. So I was just wondering if anything like that had happened to you.
I mean, I do have these memories of being a child with some dramatic tendencies, and I had a lot of emotions. And so I sometimes try to remember that when I see that in my own kids, and just kind of think of like, okay, I was very much like this. And I remember in that moment, it did feel like the end of the world, whatever it was that I thought, you know what I mean? And
Right.
so you try to remember in that moment, but
Right.
yeah.
The chapters alternate between the point of view of each family member. Which perspective was your favorite to write? And was it difficult to keep the four voices distinct in your head?
It can be, I think it was in some ways a challenge to write the four alternating points of view because, as I just mentioned, sometimes family members have these similar qualities, similar tendencies, sometimes similar ways of speaking, you know, that siblings pick up from each other or children pick up from their parents. But at the same time, each of these four characters is quite different in personality, and they're facing really different dilemmas and situations, right? So, you know, Nikesh is very much consumed by a lot of the anxieties of being a new parent, and you know, Priya is in this relationship with a married man, and you know, Lata is starting a new career and sort of experimenting with dating for the first, or the possibility of dating for the first time, and you know, Suresh is sort of dealing with the fallout of the divorce and thinking about online dating and what that looks like. So they're each in a very different situation also in life, which kind of helped to keep the voices distinct. And as I said, they also kind of came to me at different times. And so I was sort of able to develop them at different points. And that also, I think, helped keeping them quite distinct in my own head. And as for favorite, you know, over time, Lata really kind of became my favorite. I keep saying that. I don't know why I feel guilty when I say that. It's not like they're real and they're gonna be mad at me for saying that. But yeah.
It happens.
It does happen. They live in your head for so long. They start. I like to joke at this point, I have known these characters longer than I have known my husband or my kids.
Wow.
So like they are.
What was it like to say goodbye? Was it dramatic? Was it poignant and sad?
I don't know that I've said goodbye. I mean, I still kind of think about them sometimes,
Yeah.
you know, but I'm sure at some point they'll, you know, I'll think about them less. But
Right.
I'm not saying goodbye yet.
Right.
But,
Oh, you.
yeah.
I mean, you're in the thick of it. You're going to be speaking about them for many months.
Right.
I love the ending of the book. Without giving too much away, at the end of the novel, the whole family comes together. All sorts of truths are revealed, and the different threads of the story intertwine. It's also a little open-ended as to what happens with the characters next. Why did you choose to end the book this way?
Yeah, I sort of knew that I wasn't going to tie up all their stories with a neat little bow at the end and resolve it. I mean, life doesn't really work that way.
No, it
So you kind of keep, you know, you muddle through and you continue holding on to the small joys of life. You continue trying to find happiness in your own individual life and as a family. And then that's what these characters are going to keep doing. Right.
Mhm.
And so even though some things get resolved, you're right. Ultimately, each of the characters, it's a little bit open-ended at the end as to what happens with them. I think what I did know, though, even though I didn't precisely know how it was going to end the whole time, I did have a sense that I wanted to end with that image of the grandparent-grandchild, because I think there is something very unique about that relationship.
Mhm.
I feel like a grandparent sort of takes everything that ideally they've taken all these things they have learned from parenting, right? The sort of regrets, the things they wish they'd done, the things they wish they'd paid more attention to and appreciated when it was happening. And then they can just sort of channel it into being these grandparents. And I see that in my own kids' life. They're very lucky to have four amazing, devoted grandparents. So in some ways, I think because this book is so much about reinvention, there is something about that relationship to me that allows for that reinvention. You're kind of on this clean slate with this new little person you have no history with, right?
Mhm.
And so I kind of knew I wanted to end with the image of that relationship. But you're right, it is ultimately sort of left open-ended at the end what happens with the trajectory of each of the characters.
I think
Yeah.
that invests much more confidence in the reader for them to be able to create their own pathways for the people they've spent time with. I personally do not like bows at the end of my stories either, because my hope is that these characters live in the reader's mind too.
Yeah.
What do you love about writing?
I think one of the things I love about writing is one of the same things I love about reading. It's just that I love, inhabiting another character. I love that feeling of empathy and connection and that feeling a little bit less alone in the world, right? I think the other thing I actually really like about writing is I think when I write fiction, I am able to shut off that part of myself that really cares what people think.
Mm-hmm.
The part of myself that's worried about criticism or being embarrassed or looking foolish. I can just sort of follow my characters where they take me without fear or judgment. And sometimes I'm really surprised where they take me.
Mm-hmm.
That act of discovery is really exciting. But yeah, I honestly think like when I write, I kind of can be the most fearless version of myself. And I think that's why I'm drawn to it. And I keep coming back to it.
No, it's a great feeling.
It is. It's this amazing feeling.
What do you hope readers take away from your novel?
I hope readers feel joy reading it, enjoy it, first of all, because these have been a hard few years for everybody. And I know that when I was writing this book, being able, I did write part of it during the pandemic, and being able to sort of step into a portal and escape into 2009 and sort of a slightly more hopeful sort of place for a few hours of a day was really helpful for me. And so I do hope it brings people joy. I think ultimately it's this optimistic story. There's obviously tragedy and sadness and heartbreak in it too, but I think ultimately it's a hopeful story.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope some things that people take away from it is that, it's never too late for a second act. People should try for the things that they really care about, whatever their age. I think our families can change in ways that are hard to accept sometimes, that can test us, but ultimately can make us stronger and kind of grow together as a family. So I think those are some take homes.
Those are good take homes. I like those. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Oh my God. I'm hoping you guys have lots of questions.
Anybody want to start us off? I'll ask you a question as a fellow late blooming long time writer.
Okay.
How did you know when you were done? So these people have been with you since your 20s. How did you really trust that you had moved with them far enough along?
That's a really good question. I actually struggled a lot with that, figuring out when I was really done. Somebody said something at a reading I went to that made a lot of sense to me. He said, and I don't know if he was quoting somebody, but he said, "You don't finish writing a novel, you break up with a novel." And I think that's sort of what happened. At some point, I think I was like, this is as far as our relationship can go. I don't know what else to do with this relationship anymore. We've got to break up now. And that was sort of the moment I knew I was done. But I struggled a lot. I struggled a lot with that, knowing when was the right moment to be done. And yeah, I don't know. Do you have an answer to that? Do you know when you are finished with something?
I have my outline.
Oh. I gotta try this outline thing again.
Makes it easier. Usually I have a plan for whatever obstacles my characters are going to face and how and if they're going to overcome them. And then once they've overcome them and kind of climbed down the mountain, that's a wrap.
Hey, I've got a question. Actually, you're describing something that's, I imagine, a totally free-form approach to this story. And I'm curious if, as you worked on it for periods of time over a long span of years, did the story itself actually grow kind of chronologically to the order of the story, or did you actually, if you were to kind of trace the various times that you put the most effort to it, did it grow? Was it itself totally organic in terms of the growth of the story?
Do you mean, were there periods of time where I worked on it more and period of times?
No, I'm saying, so when you first worked on it, that was the beginning of the story, or did it end up being somewhere in the middle of the story and it grew around the start?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I started it, I did start with Suresh, and it's not identical to the first chapter in any way, but it did sort of start at that moment. But definitely there were other points of the story where the chronology got moved around a lot. And I think I keep talking about how this is a very inefficient approach, but I think part of what happens is I had many pages that got just thrown away because, there was a lot of changing of chronology and sort of deciding to either sort of expand the time frame and narrow the time frame and sort of playing around with that. And so, yeah, it was definitely an evolving process.
So there's the potential for the director's cut, you're saying?
Yeah, there's a big file called outtakes, and I don't know if any of that will find a home in maybe a future story or something, but yeah. Right.
I was wondering if your legal training, did it help or constrain you in writing this book?
Well, it's interesting. There is a similar experience in both kinds of writing in this way. When you're an academic, you start out with an idea for a project. You work on it, you take it as far as you can go. And at least for me, at the end of it, I'm inevitably a little bit disappointed because it hasn't quite lived up to my hope or my expectation of what it was going to be. But you kind of have to let go at some point. You send it out into the world, you kind of hope for the best, and then you move on to the next project. And that sort of feeling, getting used to that feeling, I think that is similar in fiction writing life, or it has been for me, right? You have this aspiration for something, you have some hope for what it's going to be, you take it as far as you can go, and then you're like, okay, I have to send it out into the world now. And then you kind of move on, hope for the best, and kind of move on to the next thing. And so that feeling is sort of similar, I guess. So you get, I don't know, maybe the practice of doing that in my law life was sort of helpful here. But other than that, I think the two they're really different types of writing. And again, as I said, even just my process is super different in both. Whereas in my academic writing life, I do very much work with an outline, and I think I just work in a very different way in that life.
Okay. One of the things I really love about this book is that each chapter is written from the perspective of one of the four main characters. And you've said your love for Lata. I love her too. But was there one character that you kind of struggled more to write from their perspective?
I think Nikesh's voice was the last and somewhat hardest for me to find. I think of the four, I probably struggled with his the most. And looking back, I'm not entirely sure why, because now I feel like I know him so well. I'm trying to look back and try to remember why that was. But of the four, I think his was the one that took me the longest to find. Yeah.
One of the questions that we often like to think about is like, where do you belong on a shelf, right? And sometimes that's very literal. Sometimes it's like, where do you belong in a social media post? How do we think about your book in relationship to other people? And sometimes it's very literal, but sometimes it's also like, who are your literary ancestors? Who are the people who's your canon? Mm-hmm. And so if you could really encourage folks to read you either aspirationally or literally in conjunction with other writers, who would be in your canon with you?
I mean, there's definitely so many writers I admire and I've learned from along the way. I mean, I'm drawn to writers who write about complicated family dynamics in ways that, combine humor and heartbreak in these sort of like witty ways, and so I can think of a lot of writers that do that and whose work I've really enjoyed over the years.
Zoe Fishman?
Including Zoe Fishman, of course. Jamie Attenberg and Emma Straub and Catherine Heine, just a lot of people come to mind whose work I really admire and have learned from, and again, who I think write about complicated, Jennifer Close, right? People who write about these complicated family dynamics and in these really interesting, witty ways.
Hi, Deepa. I love the idea of opening lines to books, and I'm sort of obsessed with how people choose to start them. Can you talk a little bit about how you decided to open your book?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have fairly limited experience with online dating, I will confess. I probably tried it in the mid-2000s for a little while, but I've certainly heard from a lot of people about their experiences. And I think one common complaint I've heard a lot of are sort of the ways that people lie. Either they're picture lies or they're lying about their age or things like that. So I kind of knew that first line was going to be about lying and about the women who lie, you know, and so I think that line just sort of, I don't know, popped into my head, and I knew I was going to start there. Yeah. It's hard to think back now, because as I've been working on this for so long, it's like I've been trying to reverse engineer, like, how did I do those things? But yeah.
So, yeah.
All right, so I just have to ask the what's next question.
Oh, yeah. So I am working on a couple of short stories at the moment, and I've started something sort of like right now. It's just some character sketches and some scenes, and I don't know I hope it's going to grow into a novel. I'm not sure yet. We'll see. I don't have an outline. I think what I'm learning is that I maybe need to go home and make an outline. But yeah, we'll see. It's also about a family and parents and their adult children and adult sibling relationships and secrets, and so some similar themes. But
is this a
we'll
one
see.
book contract, so there's no pressure on you? Okay.
Yeah, just one. So we'll see. Hopefully this next one will go faster. I don't know if I can take another 17 years. It's sort of faster timetable for the next one, I hope.
So, do you have any final words of wisdom for your former student and friends?
Oh, goodness. I just, just try really hard to be present and think back on all of the obstacles you overcame to get here. And I don't know about you, but there's so many parts of the process that are so impossible. And then they're possible. And I always try to apply that to life in general. So if you're able to do that, then you're ahead of the game. And I'm just really proud of you.
Well, thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
I'm so happy to have this conversation with you, and I've learned a lot from you. And
Thank you.
yeah, and thank you all for being here again.
Oh,
It
we
means
have a
lot to
question
me.
in the back.
Oh.
Yes, sir.
Nothing is impossible. So
That's right.
We have a plan. Thank you both so much for this beautiful conversation. Congratulations, Deepa. It is never too late, and you give me hope, and many other writers. So
Yes,
I love
keep
it.
trying. Keep
Yes.
sending your work out.
No, it's great. It's great. So we're gonna say goodnight to our friends who are watching virtually. You are gonna want to buy Late Bloomers. We know. So click this teal button at the bottom center of the screen to buy it from Charis. If we have any signed books left at the end of the night.